Welcome to the Council of Better Business Bureau's podcast, Better Business, Better Series, where we will explore top-of-mind topics with business and industry leaders to understand the leading trends and innovations that continue to push the envelope in today's marketplace.
For the Better Business, Better Series podcast, I'm Will Johnson. If you want to get ahead of business these days, it's probably a good idea to get a better understanding of millennials, not just to attract a really important segment of the population as customers, but also in terms of hiring them as part of your workforce. There's actually a lot of misconceptions about millennials, what matters to them, what they're buying and talking about, and what makes them a truly valuable asset to a company. Two people who know a lot about millennials are two millennials themselves. Gabrielle and Brian Bosche are here with us today. They run a business called the Millennial Solution, and they're best-selling authors on Amazon, among many other things. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
And Gabrielle, you are CEO and Chief Strategy Officer of Millennial Solutions. Brian has a company called the 60-Day Solutions, an international entrepreneurship training program. So you guys are very busy.
We like to be.
In your millennial world.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Millennials, we have short attention spans.
All right, so we'll try to get to this quickly. Gabrielle actually got her start digging into the world of millennials at the age of 17, writing the first of 3 books about her generation. I don't know what I was doing when I was 17, but I wasn't writing a book about my generation. I'd like to so we'll start there. First of all, for those of us who might not be certain, what is the age range for millennials? That's
right.
An easy one, I hope, for you.
Oh yeah. The 2 questions I usually get is what is a millennial, and the second one, soon to follow, is what is wrong with them. So we might get to the second one.
That's part of the misperceptions, right? That we'll
absolutely.
talk about.
So a millennial is born between 1981 and 2000, and that is the age range that the U.S. Census Bureau uses, and so that is what we at the Millennial Solution use, as well as other sociologists in the field.
And what happened to Gen Y? Like, do we use that anymore?
Not at all.
It's the same age?
It's absolutely the same age. I think as millennials, we got kind of tired of being called Gen Y because it's after X, and so we're like, no, let's just call ourselves millennials.
It's like an afterthought, right?
Yeah. So I think we've really embraced the term millennial. But interestingly enough, a large majority of millennials actually don't consider themselves millennials, either because they don't realize that they're a millennial born in 1982 or 1983,
right?
Or they realize that the media isn't too friendly to someone who considers themselves a millennial. So I think we've kind of determined to describe ourselves as individuals more than millennials.
And I feel like I'd be sort of excited all of a sudden learn I was a millennial, but that's because I'm older than that. So so the age range, 1981 to 2000, and the millennial name comes from a sociologist?
Right, absolutely.
Okay. And are these millennials, are they having kids, getting married? Are there some general sort of numbers you can give us?
Yeah, no, they're actually, what's interesting about millennials, especially those that came out of school around 2010, is that a lot of millennials have put off buying a home, put off getting married, put off having children because finances were tight. They were getting jobs that didn't match their skill sets after coming out of college. So what's interesting about millennials is that they're getting married later. They're having kids later. They're buying a home later. They're actually pausing. For a lot of them, had to pause their life after they came out of school.
You guys got married and you got a house. And you are millennials, right?
Yeah,
well,
we don't have a house. We don't believe in backyards.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, no, we did. We got married about a year and a half ago, and we were both 26 at the time, I think, when we got married. And see, I can't even remember.
27.
But you know,
I think it was 27.
You know a lot of people your age who are not doing that.
Right.
Oh, totally.
Right.
Yeah.
And for a number of different reasons. I mean, the number one reason studies show that millennials aren't getting married is because of student debt. The average millennial has $35,000 in undergrad debt alone. So when people are looking at millennials and giving us a hard time for not purchasing homes, not getting married, not having kids, not having a car, really, for many of us, it's a smart financial decision. That's why this year alone, 35% of all students who graduate from a 4-year college will move back in with mom and dad with a 4-year degree.
And more often than not, it's the parents' idea.
Maybe that's what makes them
we
so
give them
unpopular.
a hard time, but it's the parents' idea for these guys moving back in.
It's not a bad place to be. I mean, you get meals and hopefully and laundry and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's a different world that millennials are walking into.
Yes.
So employers in particular are looking at this next generation and they're saying, why are you, texting mom and dad about health and benefits, or, about 1% of all hiring managers, a scary statistic, but 1% of all hiring managers have said that their millennial new hire has brought in mom or dad with them into the interview. And we've seen that with clients who have said, you'll never believe this, but they brought in their mom.
Is that a bad idea? I feel like it might be.
Right. It might not be.
Maybe better to just call them your agent or something.
It
mom
may
or
not
dad.
be a good idea to bring
cute.
mom in with you. But that's the world that many millennials have been brought into. And one of the biggest myths that I talk about in my book, 5 Millennial Myths, is this idea of entitlement, that millennials are entitled, that they either deserve the world and or a trophy just for existing. And so we like to kind of lovingly tease the business owners that we work with for them to realize that so often those millennials who've been given trophies have been given trophies by very well-meaning parents and coaches. And one of my favorite quotes we share all the time in our trainings is by Chaim Greeno, who's a parenting expert from the 50s. And he said, we often criticize the next generation as if we had nothing to do with creating them.
That's a good point. So let's actually jump into more of the misconceptions. I have a few questions that I was going to ask, but let's do that. We're there. So in addition to the one you mentioned, what else do people think about millennials that may not be the case after all?
A big part is disloyalty. This idea that if I'm going to hire a millennial, they're going to quit in anywhere between 6 months to 2 to 3 years. Nationally, the average of millennial retention is between 2 and 3 years. But what's fascinating, what we found in our research, Brian and I have found, is that millennials are actually saying they're wanting to stay at their next job 5 years. So the question comes, what gives, right? The number one reason millennials quit is the same reason anyone quits, and that's the direct relationship with their supervisor. If they don't like their boss, they're not going to stick around. Age doesn't really matter. But the second reason, which is fascinating, we found this in our work, and Gallup has actually found it recently as well, is the number 2 reason is training and development opportunities. Millennials are wanting to go to employers to become better people, not just better professionals. They want to learn about time management. They want to have a mentor. They want to have an onboarding program that gets them excited about the culture. That's what millennials are looking for, and that's what they're willing to stick it out for as well.
And I would actually throw in a third reason, too. I think a lot of when it comes to bosses, managers, leaders, when it comes to the people that they're managing, I think the third thing that I would say that's missing is actually understanding that millennials are looking to apply their personal significance and their personal story to the workplace. In a lot of ways, their managers, their leaders have taken a look at their skill sets, maybe only as deep as LinkedIn or a resume, but have not actually tapped into the core of the individual to find out what kind of skill set, what kind of story, what kind of life experience they want to apply to the workplace. And what's interesting, and Gabrielle and I talk about this all the time, is that millennials are motivated by mission first, money second. They're still motivated by money, but they're motivated by mission first. So if they don't feel as if their personal significance is being applied in the workplace, that they've gone deeper than just their skills, no wonder they're leaving in 6 months
Right.
or 12 or 13 or 2 to 3 years when they had intended when they started in the onboarding process to stay as many as 5 years.
So I mean, that sounds great. I mean, I feel like we all would like to be mission driven,
Of course.
and then money second. Not a bad way to be. And you mentioned bringing their own story into the workplace. It seems like for better or for worse these days, when life and work and home are all blended, that could be a good thing. I feel like someone who's a millennial, is 20, can sort of run in and out of work in a way that can work for them and for their employer.
I think if we don't go deeper than someone's on the surface skill sets, we're missing out on a lot of potential, a lot of potential. One of the things that I've noticed in the thousands of hours that Gabrielle and I have spoken and trained is this right here, that someone's greatest achievement, their greatest success often comes from some of their life's hardest times. And I'm thinking of a story right now of a young man named Patrick who was a part of a PharmD program at a pharmaceutical company, a PharmD internship. And I was sitting across from Patrick, and I was kind of getting to know him and trying to understand what was going to keep him at this company. And I realized something that his managers had never come to understand about him. The reason he was studying pharmacy and the reason he was passionate about cancer research was because when he was 18 years old, his grandmother, who had a huge impact on his life, died of stage 4 cancer. And after I came to understand that and asked the managers in the room if they knew that, and they said no, I realized that the reason Patrick was going to be leaving and taking his $100,000 investment that the company poured into him with him was because nobody sought to understand the personal significance that he was trying to apply to the workplace. He was a bundle of talent waiting to be untapped, but it remained untapped and probably went into another company that cherished him more so.
And was able to maybe identify this mission that he cared about so much and for a personal reason.
Right.
Oh, okay. So in addition to this mission focus, what else do millennials bring to the workplace? What's a business leader going to get out of a millennial, hopefully?
Oh, yeah. Well, millennials are now the largest part of the workforce. By 2025, will be 65%. So when we're working with business leaders of small companies and in large companies, what we consistently look at is your workforce 50% millennial? Because if it's not, get ready, because it's soon going to be. The way that we see it is that we've got about 10 years before millennials really start to take over, not only as consumers, but as employees as well. 2017 actually marks the first year ever where millennials are now a majority of the consumer market. So the same mindset of being story-driven and being mission-driven that Brian's been talking about is just as applicable in the consumer market, getting millennials to buy from you, as it is in the employee retention and attracting market, getting millennials to come and work for you. So whether it's buying or working for, millennials are wanting to be a part of something larger than themselves. There's this community component of it, which we see all the time. Millennials are willing to support causes that give back. Brands like Tom Shoes or Warby Parker have really exploded in the millennial market because there's this buy one, give one type of effect. And millennials are wanting to see that at work. No longer can companies say, well, we give X amount at the end of every year for the tax write-off. Millennials actually want to be a part of that process. Mm-hmm. And many in the workforce can look at that as seeing, millennials are needy or they want to get more involved than maybe they should. But what we see it as is millennials are really incredibly ambitious. And the more that companies can tap into that ambition and they can craft a quality, exciting, and engaging opportunity for that millennial, the longer the millennial is going to work there and the more value they're going to bring to the bottom line.
What's interesting, too, is that not only are millennials going to be 50% of your workforce, what's interesting is as the baby boomers retire, because a lot of them put off retirement because of a bad economic downturn, but as baby boomers finally retire, they're in leadership positions, there aren't going to be enough Xers to replace them. So a lot of millennials are going to be fast-tracked to leadership positions whether or not they're ready. So Gabrielle was just talking about training and development. A lot of these companies are going to have to come to realize that as millennials get to that 50% mark and a lot of millennials start to take over in leadership positions, training and development and being mission-driven is going to be incredibly important.
Right.
So they're taking over.
Essentially.
Before your eyes.
Right. That is the nature of these generations, right? We get to a point in our workplace, but you're saying they might reach that point earlier.
Mm-hmm. Well, they already are. And companies who aren't embracing it, frankly, won't be around in the next 15 to 20 years. And so we're really going to see a quickening of companies either responding well and exploding or ignoring this giant tidal wave of the generation and deciding to put their head in the sand. And they may not be in existence in the next 10 to 15 years.
That reminds me of a funny story. We were at a conference just recently and a gentleman, he was a baby boomer, was talking about his company and the millennials that he was dealing with. And he said, why do I even have to cater to them? Why do I have to do this? I'm just going to sell my company anyway.
Oh, yeah.
And we're thinking to ourselves, well, that's interesting. Good luck finding a buyer that's a millennial that had a company run like that before it got to them. If you think you're going to sell your company that was never meant to cater to millennials in the workplace or in the marketplace, you've got another thing coming.
Well, and certainly with technology, this generation that has grown up fully immersed in that world with technology companies and all that's going on in the world, they're going to know a lot about it.
Yep, of course.
It's their life.
Yep.
Let's talk about, we talked about misconceptions, but that can actually hurt in the hiring process, right? I mean, they might be missing opportunities. You talk about this young man, Patrick, who is maybe going on to another position.
Oh, yeah. And I think what millennials are looking for in their next job is quite unique. And what millennials are willing to bring to the table is their passion. They're wanting to apply what they've studied. We've been talking about student debt. Millennials are coming in with a significant amount of student debt, and they're actually looking for their employers to train them to be, again, better people, not just better employees. So they're shopping opportunities around. What's interesting to note is that millennials actually determine how long they're going to stay at your company within the first 6 weeks of being on the job. Within 6 weeks. And so they're coming in, they're testing it out. They're looking at culture, right? What kind of culture? Do they like the people that they work with? Do they want to hang out with them? Where they go into lunch or happy hour, that's important to them as well. What kind of opportunities are there? Is there clarity about what the next step is? Millennials are looking for that. Third, they're looking for what Brian's been talking about, this mission component. Overall, what are we doing here, right? Millennials want to know what's our core mission and how can I make that mission more tangible. And I think fourth, what millennials are looking for is an opportunity to get involved. They want to get involved, whether that's through a mentoring program. Mentoring programs and onboarding programs, I got to tell you, well, those are the two most effective retention strategies for any company. This is what we found with our company for the last 5 years. If you don't have an effective onboarding program that is catered to the millennial, that's engaging, exciting, shares the mission, and gets them involved, you're going to lose millennials. And if you don't have a mentoring program that specifically passes down that intellectual property within inside your organization, you're going to miss out on the next generation of talent.
It truly is. The first 6 weeks. The first 6 weeks are absolutely critical. That's why we're talking onboarding programs.
For the employer.
Yes, for the employer.
Not just for the employee. That's traditionally been thought of your first 3 months or whatever it is you need to.
Right.
Yeah.
The first 6 weeks, in terms of keeping that employee and retaining them, is absolutely critical because after they've already started to make up their mind in those first 6 weeks, whether maybe a year down the road, you're going to start throwing promotions at them, you're going to start throwing raises at them, but they're going to have less effectiveness because the onboarding part wasn't right. It becomes kind of reactive to throw a promotion or throw some kind of raise in hoping that they'll stay around. But what's interesting, there's another 6-week principle, is that the high that one gets from a raise, more often than not, that high wears off in 6 weeks or less.
Kind of like dating. 6 weeks.
Then you know.
If it's not working out after that point, you're going to move on. Not that I would know anymore. So you work with companies directly with the Millennial Solution, right? And probably what you're talking about right there, mentoring programs, establishing. How do you work with companies in the process of attracting and hiring millennials?
Yeah, and as millennials, we've really come into a really exciting niche, being able to translate the mission and the vision of an organization into terms and technology that our generation resonates with. So we develop onboarding programs for companies. We develop onboarding videos, so short videos to tell the story, because we recognize that millennials are very interactive. They want things gamified. So we actually have a whole team that develops that technology around them. We develop mentoring programs, and we have a team of trainers across the United States who actually go in and do workshops for managers on how to reach and retain their millennial employees. And we train millennials as well. How do you overcome stereotypes? How do you manage up? How do you find a mentor? How do you find your purpose at work, like what Brian's been talking about? And so we found as millennials, we have a really unique message, and it's been incredibly well received with companies, not just here in the US, but around the world, really helping them attract, retain, and of course, market to the millennial generation.
I mean, it sounds like hire millennials. It's a great idea, but you've got to do your work as an employer, and it'll pay off in the long run.
Of course. And that's,
with anyone. I mean, that's hopefully true.
Right. And I recognize that it is going to take more intention and more mindfulness as an employer to reach and retain the next generation. But that investment is going to be so worth it, not only monetarily, because you're not going to be dealing with that turnover in 2 to 3 years, but you're going to have an incredibly committed, very entrepreneurial, very mindful employee who's excited about taking your company to the next level.
And if they're mission-driven and they care and they're excited, they're going to be talking about it outside of work. It's
Absolutely.
going to be something that's going to have a ripple effect.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Millennials are powerful brand ambassadors. Word of mouth is still an amazing concept that is still alive and well today with millennials, because I think it's more than 60% of advertising and marketing and brand recognition still happens word of mouth. It's still not happening on social media. So
wow. Well, it's exciting to sit with two powerful millennials here today. Clearly, you guys are doing more than I can imagine. And the next generation after this, if you're born in 2001.
2001, you were part of Gen Z.
Gen Z.
Or some are starting to call them the founder generation.
Right.
And I think that that's going to stick. Some people are calling them the homeland generation. But what we do know is they're going to be very similar to Generation X. So very independent, kind of getting things done even more reliant on technology. If employers are complaining now about our generation, get ready for the next generation because they're going to see technology as native to every part of their life, not just communication, which is what we were raised with.
It's becoming so native to them that they try to touch paperback books as
I've
if
seen
it's
the
going to do
videos,
something,
right?
Or they're actually having issues recognizing micro expressions on people's faces because of what kind of this video interactive environment that they're constantly in. They're having a hard time understanding people's facial expressions.
That brings up a whole nother topic, and actually one that would be really interesting to talk about if you find out more about that.
Yeah.
That's frightening and really interesting at the same time.
Isn't it? Yep. The future and Generation Z is coming in at a really interesting economic time as well. So there's not a lot of data out there. We're starting to collect some ourselves here at the Millennial Solution. And we'd love to come back on and share as we learn more about what the future of the workforce looks like as the workforce gets younger and younger.
Well, you mentioned micro-expressions, and this is a little off topic, but we just did an interview recently where it was about the differences between men and women. You both work together, but women, their brains recognize cues and body expressions apparently more than men. So I'll just leave you with that.
I just ignore them.
Well, you're men. Of course you do. All right. Well, thank you both very much for being here. It's really great to talk to you. I hope you'll come back and join us again.
We'd love to.
Absolutely.
Thanks to Gabrielle and Brian Bosche with the Millennial Solution for joining us today. And if you'd like to learn more about the work they do with businesses and millennials, go to millennialsolution.com, right?
Yes.
Okay. For the Better Business, Better Series podcast, I'm Will Johnson.
You just enjoyed Better Business, Better Series podcast. Be sure to tune in next month for a brand new episode. To learn more about our other shows, visit betterbusiness.blueberry.com. That's betterbusiness.blueberry.com and subscribe. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the Better Business Bureau, Council of Better Business Bureaus, or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Blueberry's Terms of Service.